So today I would like to try to explain a subject that we discussed at some points during the week. The overall theme is basically the problem with wanting to make the practice of Dhamma into something that you can do by following rules. So before I get into it a bit more, I should maybe just explain that when I say rules, I'm using that word kind of loosely as a way to say a fixed notion of this is the rule, this action is right, this one is wrong, this idea is right, this one is wrong. Taking things as a kind of fixed rule, as if it were a rule that meant, okay, if I don't do that, means I'm good. And that's as long as I didn't break the law, I have nothing to fear. And that means that I'm practicing well in Dhamma. So this attitude is a wrong attitude, and it means that you can never, ever get anywhere in the practice of Dhamma as long as you have it. So in regard to this, there's three main points about this that I'd like to explain or open up a bit more. The first is just to give an idea of what it does when we have an attitude of following the rules in Dhamma and different ways that that might show itself, or different ways that we might try to make Dhamma into something physical or something we can see or something we can measure. Then I would like to explain why, when we depend on rules or rituals or something we can measure, it means that we will never be able to actually understand what is right as right and what's wrong as wrong. And thirdly, then, to give a couple of examples of ways in which the actual practice of Dhamma can never be brought down to a rule about this is good, this is bad, and how that means that when you take things as fixed as rules, then you will never actually be able to understand what the practice of Dhamma is about. That's just to give an overall view of what this teaching is about. So without any further ado, the difficulty in the practice of Dhamma, the thing that makes it something not easy and something that is for the wise, is that it's not a rule or a set of rules that you can follow. There's no way to practice Dhamma simply by doing what you're told. That is, what I mean by that is that Dhamma is all about wisdom. Wisdom meaning understanding of the real nature of things. And at the most basic level, that means like understanding why something is good or why something is bad, why something is right, why something is wrong. Already that's a kind of wisdom, and it goes deeper than that too, but that's already more than enough to be going on with. And so already this means that for the practice of Dhamma, you have to go beyond the understanding of something being good or bad just because that's the rule, or just because somebody said so. And it might sound kind of simple or obvious, but most people find this really hard to understand. It's very hard and it can make you kind of anxious to be wholly responsible for what you do and for whether it's right or wrong. It's much easier to put the responsibility on something outside, such as a rule or a god or another person. And when you make it into like a god, or it's because of another person, or it's because of a rule, then it means that you yourself don't have to worry about whether it's right or wrong because, that's the rule, or the god said so, or somebody said so. So I don't have to worry about whether I'm right or wrong because I'm following the rule. And people also find it very hard to practice something or work on something that they can't see or can't measure by something that they physically do. And this is why people need rites and rituals. Like, we need statues of the Buddha that we can bow down to so that we can sort of measure our respect or say that, yeah, I've bowed down to the Buddha. Or making ceremonies, physical symbolic things that people do every time that they give dana, for example. Whatever I do to practice Dhamma, it must appear physically in my external actions so I can know that I'm doing it, that I'm following the rules, that I am practicing. I can see outside physically that I do this action. Another example of how people try to turn something that's not actually applicable on a physical level into something physical. For example, you might think that in order to be unselfish, then we need to just never say the word me. I never use the word I, for example, or try to just throw away all my belongings. Or like, I will not accept to be given any sort of title or position or something because that would mean that I have a self. So to sort of try to artificially create a non-self by throwing away everything or something like that, which is wrong, because Dhamma is not about only the things that you can do physically outside. It's about purification of the mind, which is not something that we can see. And I'll explain a little bit more in detail about that later on. But first of all, I wanted to say why depending on rules and rituals means that you're not able to see what's actually good and bad. So when you are dependent on the rules, again, using the word kind of rather loosely in the sense of meaning more how you think about something rather than is it actually written down as a law or not. So when you take something as a rule or as a law or something that always has to be fixed right or wrong, it means that you can't see what's good as good and bad as bad. There's actually really few physical actions, external actions, that are always exclusively good or always bad. And the only actions that are pretty much always bad are things like breaking the 5 precepts, killing, stealing, lying, cheating. It's always bad. It can't really be done out of a good intention. But most actions that we might do can be either good or bad, depending on many things, depending on our circumstances, depending on what context is, or depending especially on our intention. And that means that the same thing can be considered as good at one point and bad in another situation or for another person. And that's something that's impossible for somebody who depends on rules to understand, because a rule is always fixed, right? And that's why, that's what makes the law so complicated to study, because when you try to make a law about something, it's really hard to think about how to make the law in such a way that it won't cause a problem in some situation or another, because there might arise a situation where somebody follows the law but causes harm instead of helping, or instead of not causing harm, which is what the law is supposed to do. So somebody who is thinking about the practice of Dhamma kind of like, do I follow all of these rules or not? It's not going to be possible for them to see the nature of their intentions when they're doing something, because it's always just measuring their morality or measuring their rightness or their wrongness based on what they did outside, what their physical action was, and not what their intention was. People kind of can create laws or rules for themselves about what is right and wrong, even when there's no actual law about it. One is with things like vegetarianism, or even better is veganism, that it becomes kind of almost like a moral law for some people to really like no animal product is allowed to be eaten, and every package of everything has to be checked for every ingredient. Okay, no, the 10th ingredient on the list has some milk powder in it or something. Okay, I cannot eat, it's not right. So just like following really strictly this one rule makes people feel that they're doing a bit better, at least, or that they are a bit better than they would be if they weren't following the rule. But I don't want to get into that too much. It's just to give another example of different ways that people can take things as a fixed rule. The bottom line is that there's absolutely no way, as long as you take good and bad to be on the level of this outside physical action, or this type of food is bad and this one is good, there is no way to gain any wisdom, because wisdom is about seeing really what makes something right, which is on the level of the intention behind it, not on the level of what the outside action looks like. So in a way that it might seem paradoxical, but it's really true, when you think that morality is in following the rules, only in following the rules, there's no way to really be moral. Because for real morality, you need to know what makes something good, what makes something bad. A possibly even bigger problem, to come to the second main point I wanted to talk about, is that when you think Dhamma is on the level of following rules and doing what you're told, you'll end up thinking that you're practicing, when really you have no idea even what the practice of Dhamma is. And you won't be able to apply any aspect of the teaching that's not about just a type of physical action that you can do, or changing your physical behavior. Or else, like, in order to apply any type of teaching, the only way that you'll know is through making it into a kind of formula to follow or a law. So, for example, the teaching on mindfulness of death is that we have to work to understand and be aware of the fact that we might die at any time, and we have no idea when, and we can't do anything about it. And therefore, when we become mindful of this properly, it means that anything we might do in this life, any kind of material work, for example, is kind of useless, not really having any real value. Therefore, it means that the only thing that really has value is to practice Dhamma. But the difficulty about applying this teaching is that really applying it is only about your attitude to what you do and the things around you. It doesn't mean, for example, that you just need to stop doing anything and just sit in a room and wait to die. And if it were as simple as that, it would be easy, but it's not. And so because there is no rule, there is no like, okay, you need to just go and sit in a room, or you need to do this specifically. You just need to change your attitude. But that's not like a rule you can follow. You need to actually start becoming aware of your attitude to things and to sort of realize what is wrong with your attitude or what is right with your attitude, and to understand it. And because there's no absolute rule about it, one who depends on rules will not know whether they're following this teaching or not, because they can do all kinds of things to try to hold on to life, to try to control their life and their death. Basically have an attitude that is fully attached to my life and the things I do, but they will never realize the problem with this. Even though they might hear the teaching about mindfulness of death many times, they won't see the problem with it because they're not practicing to be aware of their attitude. They're just practicing to follow the rules. And for them, okay, as long as I follow whatever rules there are, that's fine. I'm practicing Dhamma. Another place, which is related as well, is where we run into contradiction, is on the teaching on non-self. And this is something that's misunderstood, I think, quite a lot. It's quite an easy thing to sort of intellectually or get the idea of non-ego, non-self, to come to agree with the idea, yes, selfishness, self is bad, or ego is a source of suffering. That's not even something, that's something that is talked about quite a lot, that one should not make an ego out of things, or one should practice to have no ego. But what's much more difficult is actually really seeing where it applies. We can agree with the idea that self is bad quite easily. That doesn't take that much effort, or it doesn't really require us to change anything. But at the same time, we have to realize that we don't actually in practice understand why it is a good thing to remove our ownership of things, to remove our sense of control of things, to remove our self in practice. So whenever anything actually in our lives threatens our ownership of things, or our control of things, or our idea of ourselves, just to take a very basic example, if we are driving and we have a kind of moment where we're almost about to have an accident, at that moment we might die, and that's at the moment where we're about to lose ourself. We really are about, our self is in danger, and we don't feel happy about it. We don't feel that this is a good thing. We are afraid. Or it can be on a much more basic level, or much more superficial level. Even if somebody really puts into question our idea of something, like I have an idea about something that should be done, or something that I believe, and now somebody comes and really questions this idea or criticizes it heavily, and now we really feel threatened. We don't feel happy about the possibility of our idea not being good. We'll feel either confused or anxious or angry. So really in practice, as somebody who hasn't full understanding of the Dhamma yet, as an ordinary person, we like ourselves, we need it and we want it. We don't want to get rid of it. And we definitely won't be happy when anything actually threatens anything that we take as ours, or we take as ourselves. Even though when we then go and, I don't know, read a sutta or listen to a teaching of the Dhamma, we might agree in theory that it is a good thing to practice for non-self, or to see non-self, or that non-self is the truth even. Really, in reality, we have a self, and the self needs a self to defend the self. The self needs a self to defend the self. This is actually just an honest statement of the factual position of a putuchung, an ordinary person. Really, I need a self to defend myself. That's how we start. We don't start thinking that anatta is true or that it's good. If we were, we would already be Sotapanna, or at least Sotapanna, if not Arahan. So although nobody who likes to think that they are a Buddhist will say to themselves, out loud, or will actually think to themselves, I don't think that anatta is a good idea. I don't understand why it's right. I think I need myself. I want myself. I think myself is a good thing and I don't want to lose it. But really, deep down, this is how we feel as a putuchung without understanding of the Dhamma. So we have to actually start by admitting this to ourselves, and this is the difficult thing. If we think that right from the beginning we perfectly agree with and understand the idea of non-self, as I said, if we did, we would already be at least Sotapanna. So that's a lie. We're cheating ourselves. So we have to realize that we are afraid to die, that we do get angry, that we do become anxious, that we don't want to lose our control of things. And only then can we start to properly look into the mind, to observe ourselves, to observe our attitude, and to then go in the opposite direction, to understand why this it's actually our attitude to things that is the problem, and that actually whether or not we are afraid to lose these things or not, we are going to lose them anyway. So it's it's the problem of taking something as ours that was never ours to begin with. But before we can realize this, we have to start with really questioning ourselves and observing ourselves to see how we think and behave in reality, not how we would like to think that we behave, or not how we would like to think that it is. We can't get rid of ourself or our ownership of things by just throwing things away or wishing for the self to go away. It doesn't work. We have to start by instead becoming properly moral, so understanding why things are good and why things are bad instead of just depending on rules outside. So ourselves being responsible for choosing whether we do something right or whether we do something wrong, and understanding why this is right or this is wrong. And we have to develop wisdom, enough wisdom to eventually realize and see that the things that we thought were ours and that needed to be held onto and that needed to be defended cannot be ours and were never ours, and no matter how much we try to hold on to them, we can never make them ours. So by seeing this, then you automatically let go of them. You don't need to by force throw them away.